The budget was an attack on farmers, an attack on workers, an attack on pensioners, an attack on the young, and an attack on thousands of charities and businesses across the country. The whole system is broken, Mr. Speaker.
Rachel Reeves, or as working-class Brits call her, Robber Reeves, has made her final blunder.
What a load of nonsense, Mr. Speaker. We had a budget in March this year, and tractors were not blockading the streets of Whitehall afterwards.
Kemi Badenoch is done with the delusional nonsense Reeves and Labour are dishing out.
Rachel Reeves pretended that the OBR thought that she was the bee's knees. She wanted us to think that everything she had done was going to get a stamp of approval. Instead, the opposite has happened. The OBR has actually exposed immediately how they have chosen tax over growth.
Reeves won't get away with any more fiddling and dishonesty as Kemi is out on a mission to expose her.
At the CBI conference on Monday, the Chancellor said, and I quote, "I'm clear, I'm not coming back with more borrowing or more taxes. I know that telling the truth to this House is important to the Prime Minister, so will he repeat his Chancellor's pledge now?"
Mr. Speaker, we set out our position at the budget that was just set out. We're fixing the foundations.
Even Starmer isn't supporting Rachel Reeves and her countless empty promises. In typical Starmerism fashion, he tries to deflect, but he and Rachel Reeves are in for a world of humiliation.
Mr. Speaker, he's not fixing any foundations, he's making everything worse. The whole House would have heard him refuse to repeat the Chancellor's pledge, a pledge as worthless as the manifesto promises that he's talking about. If he is fixing foundations, why is it that the PMI index shows that business confidence has crashed since the budget?
Labour's manifesto has become a pathetic joke filled with lies and dishonesty. It's no wonder that a huge wave of people are trying to boot them out of government.
There's a petition out there, 2 million people asking him to go. He's the one who doesn't know. He's the one who doesn't know how things work. It is not government that creates growth, Mr. Speaker. It is business. His employment secretary, I don't see her here, she wants more young people in work. But businesses say they are cutting jobs because of the Chancellor's budget. His Deputy Prime Minister, she is not here. Her employment rights bill will stop businesses hiring. That's what they say.
Rachel Reeves has made businesses miserable and the economy is in shambles. What else did we expect from someone who lies on their CV? Her scandals are endless and Labour is in crisis.
What a load of nonsense, Mr. Speaker. We had a budget in March this year and tractors were not blockading the streets of Whitehall afterwards. So let me give him another example of a real business. Following his budget, the head of McVitie's has said that it has been harder to understand what the case for investment in the UK is. So while the Prime Minister has been hobnobbing in Brazil, businesses have been struggling to digest his budget.
The government is an absolute disgrace to this nation, and at the forefront of this nonsense are Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer. The backlash is swift and furious, but this lot is tone deaf.
Mr. Speaker, the investment he's taking credit for was our work. I was business secretary. We negotiated those deals that he announced. But the bottom line is that in all that he has said, he doesn't seem to care about the young people who will lose their jobs as a result of his budget. Perhaps he can show more concern for the 1,100 people who found out yesterday that they could lose their jobs at Vauxhall's plant in Luton. So while he flies around making unilateral commitments, back home, the real-world effects are businesses closing in Bedfordshire and Basildon.
Starmer takes credit for what others have done and Reeves blames others for her blunders. What a perfect duo of dysfunctional, out-of-touch people who are set to make everyone's life miserable.
Easier for people. Everything he has done is attack people. The budget was an attack on farmers, an attack on workers, an attack on pensioners, an attack on the young, and an attack on thousands of charities and businesses across the country.
Everywhere you look, Reeves's budget has been an absolute disaster. Kemi's not done yet as she reminds everyone of Rachel Reeves's lying scandal and why she isn't fit to run the economy.
The whole system is broken, Mr. Speaker, and he is making things worse. He is making things worse.
Their constituents will be affected.
Mr. Speaker, he is making things worse. Everyone is unhappy. Isn't it a good thing that the Chancellor is an expert at customer complaints?
Maybe she'll do better in a job she has actual experience in, customer complaints. Another Tory minister teamed up with Kemi to further humiliate this bunch.
You, Mr. Speaker. As everyone in the House will be aware, we're currently in the middle of BBC Anti-Scam Awareness Week. And of course, the advice in that context is always simple. If you see a scam, you should report it. So with that in mind, can the Prime Minister advise the House? Is he aware of anyone who's promised to reduce energy bills only for them to increase? Is he aware of anyone who promised to back business only to tax business? And is he aware of anyone who promised to protect pensioners only to pick their pockets for their winter fuel allowance?
At this rate, Labour will never win another election and Rachel Reeves will be thrown out the window for being a fraudster. Promising one thing, doing another, Reeves is in for a harsh reality check delivered by none other than Kemi Badenoch in an interview.
During the election campaign, we pointed out that Labour's plans didn't add up. We repeatedly asked them for commitments, and now they have broken so many of their promises, as Rishi said, fiddling the fiscal rules. And we're going to need to expose them for that and make sure that they are held to account.
Kemi is out on a mission to expose and humiliate this delusional party. They promised the world during the elections, and it all turned out to be a shameful lie. Rachel Reeves is convinced that she has done nothing wrong despite a dozen economic institutions telling her that she's messing things up. Even her beloved Office of Budget Responsibility has abandoned her. What's truly appalling is how confidently they lie to our faces and still pretend to be righteous. In reality, none of them have any clue about what they're doing.
When all of the Labour MPs cheered and waved their papers about a penny off the pint, and then they laughed when we all gasped at the employers' NI rise. They don't understand what it's like to employ people. They don't understand what that means. And that is one of the fundamental differences between Conservatives and Labour. They are union workers, mostly public sector, have never run a business. We understand what this budget means. They will just start finding out.
It's like a toddler just winging it. Reeves is way out of her depth, and her actual employment history reveals the truth. At this rate, she'll crash the economy into a wall, and the rest of us will have to pay the price. It'd be a miracle if she knew how to even do her own taxes, let alone manage the finances of an entire nation. Meanwhile, Reeves is running around giving speeches, expecting a stamp of approval, but the only thing she has gotten is a furious backlash.
In her speech, Rachel Reeves pretended that the OBR thought that she was the bee's knees. She wanted us to think that everything she had done was going to get a stamp of approval. Instead, the opposite has happened. The OBR has actually exposed immediately how they have chosen tax over growth. The OBR says 75% of those employer NI rises will turn into lower wages. So employment, salaries, disposable income, all of that is going to be lower than what it was under the Conservatives. That is a big problem.
How pathetic is it when the Office of Budget Responsibility, which Reeves has championed since the start, turns around and throws her under the bus? No institute has confidence in her budget, and even Starmer is failing to do damage control. The worst part is, this is all common sense. Kemi Badenoch and Rishi Sunak warned Labour of the consequences, but Reeves went ahead with it anyway.
This is nonsense. This is total nonsense. There was a reason why we were there for 14 years, and that is because the public trusted us and they kept giving us a majority, kept putting us in office. That's what she forgets. I'm not here to pretend that the last few years were great. They obviously were not, otherwise we would still be in government. But the bottom line is that Labour has no plan. They just want to blame Conservatives. Oh, those mean Tories did it all, and there's nothing we can do about it. There's no imagination, no creativity, no belief in this country.
Starmer's attempts at damage control are laughable at best. The excuse that he and Reeves love to use is that the Conservatives left this mess. The facts reveal an entirely different story. If things were so bad under the Conservatives, they wouldn't have been in power for so long. The reality is, this lot is just plain incompetent. At least Kemi has the decency to admit that the Tories messed up. Reeves, on the other hand, is clobbering the farmers, pensioners, and the working class while pretending to be a saint who does nothing wrong.
Do you think that what has happened with the agricultural relief, with inheritance tax, is very, very bad? Most farms are worth way more than £1 million. It doesn't mean that they're wealthy. Farming is a very, very difficult business. It requires a lot of planning over many years, and most farmers and most farms are family businesses. If you make it hard to pass it on to the next generation, we're not going to have anybody growing food in our country.
Something I just locked horns with the Chancellor over was the announcement of an Office of Value for Money with an appropriate commissioner or chair, David Goldstone.
The farmers are outright furious, and the strikes are a clear message that they won't tolerate this nonsense from an out-of-touch government. The entire policy just reveals that Rachel Reeves has no idea what she's doing and doesn't understand the first thing about this nation's economy, especially farming. Unlike Labour, Kemi is intent on listening to the people and correcting the Tories where they went wrong before. That's something the stubborn duo, Starmer and Reeves, can learn from.
We are constantly trying to solve problems with more quangos, more bureaucrats, more politicians. This is not how you deliver growth. We should be able to determine value for money within the civil service itself. If they cannot do that, then I have no confidence that an Office for Value for Money will know how to do that either. That expertise should already be in the Treasury.
Every solution Rachel Reeves has come up with is a non-solution so far. The numbers just don't add up, and the whole approach is bizarre. The way to deliver growth is to let businesses do what they want, within limits. Rachel Reeves, on the other hand, would rather meddle in with everything and completely ruin their ability to actually grow. Not a single person with common sense in this nation trusts Starmer or Reeves anymore, and for rightfully so.
I don't want to in any way suggest that we're going to keep coming back for more, because that isn't the plan. That
so no more tax rises.
So we did the tough stuff in order to stabilise, because what individuals and particularly businesses have said to me is, look, do the tough stuff, but then we need the degree of certainty. We need to know that things aren't going to materially change.
Starmer is terrified and keeps dancing around the topics instead of providing any real answers. So Keir must be annoyed at Rachel for creating such a mess that even he is struggling to deflect. He's refusing to confirm that there won't be any more tax hikes and hidden costs that we'll have to bear, and that's incredibly concerning. Are they trying to tax us dry into poverty? Well, Rachel Reeves is saying something else entirely, so who do we trust?
Well, just last week, the Chancellor explicitly ruled out further tax rises in an address to the CBI, where she told business leaders, "I'm really clear, I'm not coming back with more borrowing or more taxes." Taxes are, of course, at a record high at the moment, but can or even should further rises ever be ruled out? And would you be willing to pay more taxes if needed?
People are losing their minds due to this disunited government. Starmer says one thing and Reeves says the exact opposite. Now, Rachel Reeves has explicitly said that there won't be any further tax rises. Is that another promise she'll end up breaking? At this point, anything that comes out of this government's mouth should be immediately doubted. They've lied to us before. What's stopping Rachel from doing it again? As for the question of paying taxes, everyone is already fuming with anger. To make things worse, you'll be seething once you find out where all that money is going.
No, he can't, and maybe it was down to Rachel Reeves, running her mouth saying that they're definitely not going to raise them again. Because, I mean, that in and of itself, it's not a great look, is it, to have a divided ruling class in that kind of way, where one person's saying one thing, the other is saying another. It's just not great. But my sort of stance on this, to be honest, is, look, tax is a necessary evil. And I'm actually a big believer in the idea that the state can be used to do positive things for a country, right? I'm not a libertarian. I think the state is a good thing. But the question is who, right? Because at the moment, our state is occupied by idiots who clearly don't know how to spend our money.
What we're seeing right now is the Labour Party in crisis. Starmer is doing everything he can to regain support, and Rachel Reeves is being a huge problem for him. He likes to keep things vague, and now Reeves has gone ahead and made another promise. Nobody has a problem with taxes, assuming that money is being spent wisely. Sadly, we've elected a bunch of idiots who would rather spend on foreign funding programs and illegal immigrants instead of the British citizens.
For example, at least £23 billion a year is being spent explicitly on foreigners. So this is things like foreign aid, on which we spend about 15 billion, housing asylum seekers, about 5.5 billion, and so-called climate aid, which is approaching 5 billion. So these are areas that are obviously wasteful, obviously not in the interests of the British people, and it should be there that our government looks for cuts first, rather than immediately going and taxing ordinary people. Because as everyone knows,
literally none of those help the working class Brit. While you struggle to make ends meet and pay the barrage of taxes that Rachel Reeves keeps throwing at you, all that money is being thrown at the most useless or unnecessary things possible. Maybe instead of giving billions of pounds worth of benefits to immigrants, Starmer and Rachel Reeves should focus on our freezing pensioners and struggling farmers. really goes to show what the real priority of this government is.
It's a disincentive to live here, like not just not to work. It's just why would you remain in this country if you're not going to get a fair day's pay, right? Because of taxation. It's just, you know, it's logical that you would leave. But this is the problem with the kind of and the other thing about this topic actually about tax that I don't see a lot of people ever talking about is the more fundamental question about what this says about how our country has changed.
Our country has changed and the government's priorities have shifted. It went from helping the British people and making this nation prosper to shoveling money at everyone but us. Guess what happens next? Those who can afford to will leave the country and us common people will be left to deal with the consequences. We're talking about a higher cost of living, worse working conditions, and a borderline collapsing economy. Britain under Starmer and Rachel Reeves is nowhere near what it used to stand for.
First of all, have to address the more fundamental issue of the fact that our nation doesn't really have much in the way of shared identity anymore, partly because of mass migration, but also because of, you know, I mean, house building is something we're going to talk about later on today. You look at the way this country looks now, the built environment of this country, it's not somewhere that people feel proud of. And
we've lost our identity and culture, and that's all thanks to Labour's liberal agenda. Their sinister plan is to turn the nation into a globalist hub that's easier to control and influence. It's unfortunate, but people really aren't proud of this nation anymore, and why would they be anyway? We're being crushed socially by Labour, economically by Rachel Reeves, and royally by Keir Starmer. The Tories messed up, but Kemi is ready to rebuild the party and throw Labour out of the government.
Because the Labour Party are not just repeating many of the mistakes which we made in government, they are doubling down on them and combining them with an unprecedented raid on business. Today, we are all talking about the consequences of the budget, but we do not yet know what the full consequences of their legislative program will be, like their employment rights bill, designed by trade unions.
The humbleness, honesty, and transparency that Kemi is bringing to the table is truly refreshing. While people like Angela Rayner just lose their mind and keep waffling appalling statements, Kemi has control and restraint. She knows when to be calm and when to absolutely demolish the likes of Rachel Reeves and Starmer. She is admitting that the Tories messed up and, while fixing the party, is offering advice to Starmer. Will he listen? Or is the tone deaf so softy hard on hearing?
Every big business started out as a small business, and that is why I'm so concerned that the burden on them is still increasing, with taxes, corporation tax, employers' national insurance, and new regulations. The new government believes that invisible businesses can absorb these costs, but it is everyday people who bear the brunt, either in higher prices or lower wages, sometimes both.
The Labour government has no idea how the financial world functions, and everything Rachel Reeves has done is a proof of that. They think that companies can just magically pull more money out of nowhere to pay them with, but that's just a foolish misunderstanding. In the end, it's people like you and I who will end up suffering. The wages will be lowered, the taxes will increase further, and inflation will be truly out of control.
Politics needs to accept boundaries. Every day in the legislature, someone has a great new idea that sounds nice in principle, but in practice creates more red tape, more bureaucracy, more burden.
Labour just doesn't know what their limits are. We have Rachel Reeves, who is already running away from a CV lying scandal, trying to tell businesses what to do. In what world is that a good idea? Everything she's doing is bound to fail because what this economy needs is support from the government, not more burdens. The message is clear. Rachel Reeves and her little schemes that only work on paper are not welcome.
What is the role of the state? What can we do to create a level playing field and allow you to go out and fix those problems? Finally, government itself must change. It must change what it does if growth is ever properly to return. We didn't address this when we were in government, and if Labour does not, they will fail.
Kemi is asking the right questions and giving the right warnings to Labour. Yes, the Tories were bad last year, but what Labour is doing is somehow even worse. Growth is stunted and the people are outraged. Just look at the millions of citizens signing the petition to get rid of Starmer and his gang of incompetent cronies. At this rate, Rachel Reeves needs to either fix her act or start looking for a new job.
Would a Conservative government under your leadership reverse the Chancellor's decision to raise employers' national insurance contributions?
Well, one of the things which I have said is that where we can see that a change that has been brought in the budget will obviously not work and will not raise any money, we will change that. I said that, for instance, with the family farms tax, the agricultural property relief. We did not have employers' national insurance at this rate. So it's quite clear, certainly you look at the last budget and what we did, that we did not think it should be this high.
In the nicest way possible, Kemi lets everyone know that what Reeves has done is a disaster that needs to be reversed. People like Angela Rayner can learn from this, but she's too busy making disgusting comments about whoever she can. The Tories lost brutally, but Kemi seems to be ready to turn that around.
We believe that employers' national insurance, while necessary to help us fund public services, is a tax on jobs. I know this from personal experience. When employers have to pay it, it means that they have less money for higher wages. They may not create new jobs. So we need to make sure that the balance is right. The fact that so many organizations, especially those that have people who are on the lowest wages, are saying that this is becoming unaffordable means that we should look again. And that's one of the first things that we're going to be doing when we start our policy platform.
The Tories under Kemi Badenoch seem to have a solid plan. When she's not busy absolutely demolishing Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer or Angela Rayner, she's coming up with actual plans to fix the mess that this nation is in. She understands how things work, and that's refreshing to see after this bumbling lot that have been throwing horrible policies around. So, as more and more people join the outrage against Starmer, will the Tories redeem themselves and get back in government? It all depends on your support, and that's something you can show by liking this video and subscribing to the channel.